I wanted to make a video about the value of innovation in Jiu Jitsu. Now, if you have a professional background in fields like tech or business, you're probably a very driven, innovation-driven person, right? And when you go and train Jiu Jitsu, you take this approach with you. Now, of course, there's no doubt in my mind that innovation is a good thing for the development of the sport. And without progress, we would still, Jiu-Jitsu would still look like it used to, in the 80s and 90s. And obviously, I'm not advocating for that. The problem is when innovation becomes an end in and on itself. And so positions start to get marketed and to get sort of shipped through the social media especially, and they get hyped just because they are innovations, right? Just because they are new, as it were. Now, of course, one of the great problems with innovations, and this is something that it's absolutely not limited to Jiu-Jitsu, is the idea of a survivor bias. Because a survival bias, obviously a survival bias is this idea that is this logical error that makes so that whenever there's a selection process, we tend to remember things that actually passed the selection, and we tend to forget things that didn't pass the selection. And obviously, this is something that is there's a massive problem in Jiu-Jitsu, because we tend to remember all the things, the innovations that actually made it, right? It became part of the standard curriculum. But we tend to forget all the things that didn't make it, right? There's an amazing book, has nothing to do with Jiu-Jitsu, but there's an amazing book called Inventions That Didn't Change the World, and that's what it says on the tin. It's a British archivist that wrote a book about the Victorian era and collects a lot of inventions that just were deemed as improvements and just sort of new and exciting. Obviously, the Victorian era is an era of gadgets. It's an era of sort of consumerism, and they actually invented the word gadget, by the way. And there are some hilarious inventions like this continuous stream enema fountain syringe, invented supposedly in 1850. And obviously, well, that didn't really go far. It's something that didn't really make the selection, yet was deemed as a great invention. There's a patent and everything. Now, as a beginner, how can you tell the difference between, the Jiu-Jitsu equivalent of a continuous stream enema fountain syringe and, pasteurization or something? How can you tell the difference? Because obviously, as a beginner, you're often not equipped to tell the difference between one thing and the other, between an enema syringe and pasteurization. My recommendation is ask yourself, as you would probably in your professional life, ask yourself, does this innovation respond to a need? Is there a position to which this innovation responds to? Is there a position in which people are often getting stuck? Is there a position in which people are often getting submitted? Is there a position in which often they sort of need to scramble out without a clear systematic way out of it? Does this innovation respond to any of those needs? If the answer is yes, sure, go ahead, practice it, drill it. If the answer is no, it's probably, an Instagram hype, okay? Again, as a beginner, you might not be equipped to understand this difference, okay? Ask your coach, watch matches, okay? Because at the end of the day, don't forget that whenever you're training, like in everything else, you're not just competing against, your opponent, against yourself, but you're also competing against time. If you train 3, 4, 5 hours a week, okay, even if you're a professional and you train 24 hours a week, well, it's still a competition against time. And so if you spend your training time chasing butterflies and just sort of constantly trying out a new innovation and sort of constantly trying out the new thing that popped up on Instagram, you might just not optimize your training time, and you're not going to get as good as you could have been if you had, stick to a more sort of reasonable plan in which, you walk this sort of fine line between things that are proven, that sort of been there forever, basically, and things that are sort of cutting edge and ahead of the curve. Remember, not everything new is cutting edge. Not everything new means being ahead of the curve. Okay, there's a fine line there, and in my opinion, the best way to navigate this complexities is just to have a conversation with your coach. Okay, because your coach will have more experience, and looking at something, if they're an open-minded person, looking at something, they will be better equipped to realize whether this new position you're sort of presenting them is a continuous stream enema fountain syringe or is actually, penicillin.